So, you have been asked to write a recommendation letter for a student. If you have not, don't worry. If you are in teaching, at some point you undoubtedly will be asked to write one. And it can seem a bit intimidating at first to write one, even as much, at least for me, it's an honor for a student to think highly enough of me to ask me to write one. But still, it can be a bit daunting, especially if you've not written one or if you've not written many. Luckily, there are some good resources out there for writing some. You might have even written some before and think to yourself, well, I know how to write a good letter. And I'll say this, that a good letter is not one necessarily that's positive, but rather one that is so well crafted and detailed that it will directly address whatever it is that student is trying to obtain. Now, that sometimes does not rest so much on our ability to write as it is in how much information that the student provides you from which you have material to write something strong for them. So that's why there has to be a back and forth, and hopefully the student has contacted you at least a month prior to the deadline of needing this letter. Otherwise, if they've contacted you with not much time, then it may be best that you just decline writing one, because someone else may have more time in order to, even with a short deadline, they just might not have as much on their plate in order to write one that is very strong for that student. So, a lot of times, if you've not written one, I know when I first was trying to get some ideas as to how to even write this thing, because guess what? Something like this, at least in my experience, has been no one actually teaches you this, and that's why I'm making this now, at least to get people kind of started. So you might get on Google here and put in something like how to write, and as you can see, a letter of recommendation, and I've already been searching for this, and there are a lot of results. But as you go through, and watch out for what I would say hyperbolic claims, like writing a perfect letter of recommendation. And you might even look and say, well, wow, it's by Forbes. And hey, who doesn't like to have a template that pretty much does the work for you? Well, I'm going to click on this and explain to you why this is, in my opinion, a very bad choice as a way to go. And so, as we scroll down through here, and we see this template, and then we go to the next page, it will tell you, well, you should personalize it some more. But a lot of times, especially if someone's in a rush, if you're just filling in these little blanks here with the rest of it the same, and this article has had over 750,000 views, so I'm sure there are probably several thousand variations of this letter with just these places, filled in the bracketed areas. But if you actually read through it, it's my absolute pleasure to recommend this kind of thing. So, but the way things are read, as you're reading through this, if you only kind of plug in this little bit of information, and their example on the next page does that. As someone who would be hiring and used to the language of these sorts of letters, this is a really bad way to try to write a letter for someone, because it sounds like a form. It sounds like you really don't know that person that you're writing a letter of recommendation for, and that perhaps because the wording, it seems a bit in some places, right, this hyperbole, right, this undeniable talent, an absolute joy to work with, and true team player. So the way that the language plays here really seems faked. And I would think, as an employer, it seems like they're trying to say something nice, but I'm not getting really any specifics about what this person's really like. And so I would think that the recommender really doesn't know that person very well, or they are kind of hinting that in a way this sort of becomes a bit neutral, not to the extent that some can, but it really seems like they felt obligated to write this letter, but they really don't have anything truly good to say about this person, so they're just kind of throwing some stuff out there that, again, sounds like a formula that they sort of pull out for when someone they don't really know, but they went ahead and agreed to write something, wrote it. Or, on the other hand, they might think, well, perhaps whoever asked for the recommendation, whoever is being recommended in the letter, didn't get sufficient time or information in order for there to be an actually good, strong letter written for that applicant. Okay, so that's why if you see something that says like a template to do this thing, or the perfect way, steer away from it. So, a couple of good, in fact, really, in order to get an idea of things, you really need to see a number of different resources for these sorts of things. And the two that I'm kind of recommending, at least at this point, is there's one here. I'm actually going to open a new tab from this Prep Scholar. And first, explaining really why a recommendation letter is even really important and why it's important to really craft it well. So I would say go through this. This is on the blog.prepscholar.com/9 letter of recommendation samples, which as you go through here are the recommendation samples by a number of for different situations, but also give some parts to it, give some feedback, like using an official format. Do not make any of these things informal at all. And then there are actually some more links here for amazing samples of recommendation letters from teachers. So have a look at that. And then the other, which is even more detailed and a very strong way of looking at things, is from the Purdue OWL. Right, so that's Purdue Online Writing Lab. So tips for educators and guidance counselors on, first of all, accepting or even declining a request to write a letter of recommendation. So these are things to think about. And as you see at the very top is your own schedule. Do you actually have the time to devote to writing an excellent letter of recommendation? Writing an excellent recommendation letter is a lot like writing an academic essay. You really have to do the research on that student. Even if you just had them in class, there's so much more that they have going on that you could address if you know more about that student from what they give you, and you have the time to then look through that material. So that's where your knowledge of the student coming in, and also your qualifications. There are times where I think students didn't understand when I had to say, I would personally be happy to write one for them. However, given the type of position that they're looking for, and my own position in the academy not being authority that they could possibly turn to for this kind of help, I did decline writing some, because I knew that they were, as I talked to them about the things that they do, to help them figure out people who are better positioned to help them by writing these letters. And so that's the other thing too, is that a lot of times we want to help so much that we go ahead and we agree to things, not thinking of our own time frames, but also what are our qualifications for doing so. If we're not someone's maybe major professor, or even within their field, if they're taking a class from you, but maybe your course is an elective as opposed to being in their major, or sometimes they're looking for certain types of jobs, and I say, yes, but you know what? This supervisor you've told me about, have you asked them? And they say, well, they weren't sure about it. They thought maybe they would go with professors. And I say, yes, but that supervisor that's worked with you for 3 years, that's the person to definitely ask. And then if you need others, then branch out from there. But start, with that. So if it was a good working relationship. So those are some of the things. So have a look through these materials, how to format it. It'll tell you how to get these sections. And here's the thing. This what I was pointing out in that other article. And avoiding ambiguous language and hyperbolic cliches, right? Because that is kind of a red flag for those who are hiring. So then this will tell you, some of that. Even giving, criticism is fine. What you want to do is contextualize it, as it says here, and because sometimes it's not that a student has something that might be looked at as a flaw to whoever's hiring, but rather there were extenuating circumstances that maybe there was something that could have been worked on for that student, right? So have a look at those things, and that should help you in writing one for a student. So making sure, like in my case, students need to bring to me an updated resume. I want their teaching statement, their artist statement, and talk to them about their artwork and their teaching experiences, both with me and outside of my classes. And that way I can tie all those things together and of what I've observed of them in my class, but also where I can see connections between that and their general disposition that I might not get to see in class, that maybe they express in those statements, or within their experiences. If I have a student I see that does volunteer work and at the same time as being a full-time student and working 2 jobs and this kind of thing, so it allows me to then get a better picture of that person I'm writing a letter for. So keep those things in mind, and I hope this helped at least some.